Welcome to the PortlandNeighborhood.com podcast, where we share gems of Portland's 95 neighborhoods with you. Stay tuned. Welcome to St. John's Neighborhoods podcast. We're going to talk about this gem of a neighborhood that feels very detached from Portland proper. A distinct small town feel to it. It's located on the very tip of North Portland, bordered by Linton, Cathedral Park, University Park, Portsmouth, and Kenton neighborhoods. The post office, coffee shops, breakfast places, restaurants, movie theaters, grocery stores, and several parks are all within walking distance for residents who live close to the downtown strip. St. John's has a rich and interesting history, actually. In 1843, the pioneer settler of Linton, James John, moved across the river and started St. John's in about 1865. St. John's became part of Portland in 1915, 2 years before Linton joined the growing city. There actually used to be a lot of streetcars in St. John's, and many interesting old houses and buildings still remain. It's not possible to discuss St. John's without singing the praises of the St. John's Bridge. The bridge is stunning and the focal point of many famous photos. In fact, I think it's actually one of the most photographed spots in Portland. It is often compared to the Golden Gate Bridge and mistakenly reported as being designed by the same person, though that's not true. The builder of the St. John's Bridge was John Steinman, who is rumored to be a rival to the builder of the Golden Gate Bridge. One virtue of the bridge that is often overlooked by much of Portland is that it's only a 12-mile commute to downtown Portland and only a 15 to 20-minute commute to Beaverton or Hillsborough. Highway 30, the road connecting the other side of the bridge to downtown Portland, suffers very little traffic actually during the 8 to 5 or 9 to 6 commute hours, although anecdotally it's busier during earlier hours, 5 to 7 a.m. and 2:30 to 4:30. Germantown Road to Skyline or Cornelius Pass has light traffic during banker's hours commute, but it is getting progressively worse, just so you know. St. John's is described by locals as an extremely friendly neighborhood vibe. It's considered a town within a city. There seems to be quite an underground of artists and fellow travelers in these parts. Some parts of St. John's feel new and others feel gritty and perhaps not so safe, especially at night. St. John's features all styles of Portland architecture, from ranches and Cape Cods to the occasional Victorian home. St. John's is an older Portland community, and there are definitely some beautiful mansions, especially if you're driving down Willamette Boulevard along the ridge to overlook the industrial park. You can click on the link at portlandneighborhood.com/St. John's to see all the current homes for sale in St. John's. Just so you know, the zip code is 97203. There's a link to St. John's Neighborhood Association page at portlandneighborhood.com/St. John's with meeting times, census data, and more. There's also a link to stjohnsreview.com, which is Portland's oldest community newspaper. And St. John's can be proud that Portland's oldest community newspaper, the St. John's Review, has continued publications for more than 100 years. It was founded in 1904 by J.C. Crome and has been owned by Gala Patton since 1994. Offices are in the historic Cathedral Park Place building, which once housed the Portland Woolen Mills. St. John's has had an annual parade for more than 50 years since 1962 with homemade floats and more. It is a free, family-friendly celebration and a great way to get to know your neighbors and local businesses. The St. John's beloved Farmers Market is Saturdays 9 a.m. to 2 p.m., starting May 18th and going through October 26th. It's in the St. John's Plaza at North Lombard in North Philadelphia, and you can click on the St. John's profile page on portlandneighborhood.com to find out more about the market and local businesses' websites that participate. The St. John's area schools start with Children's Journey at James John Elementary School. The middle school aspect of that journey would be at George Middle School, and on to high school at Roosevelt High School. St. John's is home to the beautiful Cathedral Park. The aptly named park, which is directly below the bridge, is home to not only the cathedral-like arches of the bridge piers, but a boat ramp, a dog off-leash area, and a hiking trail. The park itself was created out of what was essentially wasteland under the bridge in the early 1970s by St. John's honorary mayor Howard Galbraith, per Portland Parks and Recreation. There is a water pollution control lab that has charming natural habitat with a wetland sanctuary where you may spot nutria and red-winged blackbirds. The yearly St. John's Blues Festival is also held in St. John's Cathedral Park. It's also one of the most popular places in Portland to get married, right under the bridge at the top of the staircase, with the epic and famous view right down the arches of the bridge. Forest Park has a trailhead on the west side of the St. John's Bridge. You can walk across the bridge and be right in the forest. It's absolutely beautiful, and Forest Park is the largest old-growth urban forest in the United States. This trail area of the park, right across from St. John's Bridge, features the most wildlife. You may spot some deer and other animals foraging quietly in the forest. The Smith and Bybee Lakes Wildlife Sanctuary is tucked away in St. John's. It's a protected wetland scenic area that is unique and beautiful and a bird watcher's delight. The Portland Parks website indicates that most visitors to the lakes can find beaver, river otter, black-tailed deer, osprey, bald eagles, and one of the largest remaining populations of western painted turtles in Oregon. The Columbia Slough has boat ramps where people take canoes and rafts for a relaxing ride. There's also public art along the restored trail. Pier Park is another great park that is like a little forest, well, big forest actually, because the trees are very tall, and sometimes hosts classical music performances. There's also beaches along the Kelly Point Park, and that park is at the very tip of St. John's and actually borders both the Columbia and the Willamette Rivers. St. John's originally settled independently of Portland and used to have its own complete city hall. Now that building houses the police station. Are the two towns one still, or are they? Of course, legally, the two cities are one. And then there's that kumbaya, can't we all just get along way? Sure. But walking the streets, it doesn't take that long to get the vibe that, Toto, we're not in Portland anymore. Somewhere between the architecture that's frozen at different moments in Main Street Americana and the fiercely, did I mention fiercely, proud neighbors and proprietors, it is a sense of community that is different, special, even self-reflective. It's as if the community pastime consists of pinching oneself at the opportunity to live and work in St. John's. I used to live in St. John's, actually, and I have to admit that one of the things that I strongly notice about St. John's is the many generations of people that have lived there and how local the community tends to stay because, one, it is on the further out edge of North Portland, but two, because people there have really created a sense of community, belonging, pride, and they do really feel like the community has started to get a little too expensive because of, the typical gentrification that has happened all over the West Coast and other parts of the United States. So with that said, if you are planning to move into the neighborhood, be aware of the sensitivity that is needed to the locals that have been there for multiple generations for their difficulty in being able to maintain the status quo in that neighborhood. So just know that, they are a very friendly neighborhood. They are very welcoming, and they do require some sensitivity in these times that are changing for them. Of course, some of the St. John's satisfaction has to do with age. No rocket science here. Plain and simple, history equals roots equals pride. And in St. John's, you can't throw a rock and not hit something historic. Some of the oldest buildings in all of Portland are actually in St. John's, as well as some of the oldest businesses. The bike shop clocks in as the very first, established in 1925, and it's now in its third generation. The bakery is also in its third generation. The hardware store was the oldest in the land before hard times, but it's making a comeback. You can chomp on pizza at a gas station that goes back to the 1930s, and the soda fountain was flowing in the 50s. Most of the proprietors live nearby, and their sense of community weighs in far stronger than any feelings of competition. When you talk to shop owners in St. John's, they can't wait to recommend several other shops on the block. They'll tell you who owns them, how long they've been around, and the quality of work that they're up to. One of the fun things about St. John's is there's such community pride. They have a very well-known sticker in the entire city and actually the whole country, I think, may at one point have taken notice of a car driving down the road with I love St. John's. Well, it's I heart St. John's, and it's got the bridge in the middle of the heart. So that's how much community pride there is. They've even taken merchandising very seriously. And if you go around the neighborhood, you'll even notice almost all the businesses at some point will either have a logo with the St. John's Bridge in it, or merchandise with the St. John's Bridge in it, or something that just tells of their pride of St. John's. Thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed and learned a few new things about this gem of a neighborhood in Portland. Get out and explore and check out more at portlandneighborhood.com.